Welcome and good evening, and thank you for joining me in what I hope will be a really inspiring and interesting evening. Tonight we have a lived panel, three very exceptional people, and I don't say it lightly, each one who is going to share their personal experiences. This is the end of the mental health weekend, a weekend which was the brainchild of Robert Epstein and has been taken over by Jamie to educate people about mental health. Mental health is more relevant and important than ever. And just like our physical health needs looking after, so too our well-being needs looking after. 1 in 4 of us will actually experience some mental health issue every year. That's a lot. And our aim is to achieve a vision to educate people and to help people and to take away the stigma and the taboo that we don't have people suffering. This is not something new. This is something that people have been suffering for years. But luckily we are living in a time where it's far more understood than ever. Even in the biblical times, we're told that many of our leaders suffered. Jacob, Saul, King David, Jonah, these are all problems that have been going on for years, but we are living in a time where we're more educated and we understand more. And so I would like to introduce to you our first panelist, a wonderful woman called Cheryl Friedman, who is the most similar in age to me, and who also was brought up with the attitude of snap yourself together and just pull yourself together and it's okay, and has got her story to share with us. Cheryl would like to join you. Would you like to join me now, please? Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. I can tell you, by the way, firstly, that Cheryl and I have decided that we are meeting up for lunch after COVID because we have formed such a lovely connection, and she is just such a pleasure to talk to. And well, it's true. And she describes herself as the heart and soul of the party, always laughing, always bubbling. And I have to say that perhaps the most important lesson that we can learn from someone like Cheryl is that one never ever knows what's going on behind the scenes and how someone really feels. I'm going to let you share a little bit about your story, but what I've understood from you is that you came from that classic home of everything's okay, everything's fine, you suffered from anxiety as a child, and it wasn't really understood. But I would like you to share with us now a little bit about your journey and to share with us what helped you, please.
Of course. Thank you for letting me join this panel this evening. It's really nice to see you and have the audience out there. So as you rightly said, I came from a very normal family that didn't really talk, mental health issues never came up in my family, didn't really think about it. And then from the time I was 9, I suffered from very bad stomach pains. And at that time, my parents decided to take me to somebody in Harley Street who did various tests, and it came back with saying that it's anxiety. Didn't think anything of it, just carried on with my life. And then once I got into my early 20s, I had a great job and had a lovely boyfriend, and everything was going really, really well. And then it suddenly experienced very severe panic attacks at work. And also it just came out of nowhere. I didn't really know what triggered it. It just was from nowhere. It wasn't really a stressful job. It just developed. And at that time, I can't really remember discussing it with my parents or my family. It was just something that I just got on with and carried on with my life. And then for a few years, everything was okay. Got married, I had my first daughter, and then when she was only a few days old, experienced very bad panic attacks again, also from nowhere. In hindsight now, I probably think that was postnatal depression. It was never diagnosed. My daughter's now 22, so it was a long time ago, but still, unfortunately, even calling the doctor and midwives, nobody ever mentioned it. It was never mentioned. And then after that, she grew up, obviously, thank God, and everything was okay. And then I hit a bit of a dip, a very low dip in late 2010, 2011, I also, for no reason, started having panic attacks, very, very bad anxiety, and severe depression. I experienced also a sort of breakdown, I call it a breakdown. It was, I couldn't decipher what was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was pretty bad. It was very bad. At that time, like you rightly said, I never discussed it with my parents. My parents were, I'm the youngest of three, so my parents were a lot older than my peers' parents. So they had different ideas and different ways to look at things. So they were a little like...
You know what touched me actually when we spoke? That you said actually that your mother never even knew, and she even till she passed away.
Yeah.
You never felt comfortable even sharing it with her, even as we got older.
Yeah, I think one of my worst time in the sort of 2010, sorry, she was quite ill by then, and it did come up once, and they actually said to me, both my parents at the time, saying, well, you've got to just pull yourself together. I mean, you know, what are you talking about? So I just did what I thought was, I tried to pull myself together, but as people with mental health issues know, that's not something you can do. It's not, it's very irrational. And of course, that's all I wanted to do. I thought I was going crazy. So at my darkest time, unfortunately, my husband didn't really get it either. My children witnessed me going through these episodes, which was harrowing for them, I'm sure, at the time. They were quite young. And it was just one faithful day where I was at my lowest, having these severe panic attacks and then on to depression, that my husband managed to get me some help with an emergency doctor, who then led me on to a psychiatrist. And then the story goes from there. I had lots of sessions with a psychiatrist who was amazing. And at that time, my husband didn't really understand, and I suppose to an extent, neither did I, the implications of ill mental health. And I decided to take him along with me. I think he was a bit reluctant to go. Because
we spoke about this. We spoke about, which is quite common, that men generally are fixers. And, exactly. And if you needed to get medication, he would go across the world to get it for you. But exactly. When they don't know how to deal with a situation, it's really, really hard. And it really very often has an impact on a relationship because the man won't know how to deal with not being able to help.
That's very true. And it was hard for him. I can't imagine how hard it was for him. So he reluctantly came with me, and I'll never forget that day. I was in tears. I honestly, in the depth of my despair, I thought I was, that was me finished. I was losing my mind. And this very kind, calming doctor said to me, it diagnosed me with severe depression and severe anxiety. He said, but Cheryl, I'm telling you, you are very ill, but you will get better. And when he said those words to me, I thought there is light at the end of the tunnel. And it was a long story.
It's interesting that you say that, because I saw an interview with Guy Mervis and Johnny Benjamin, and he said the same thing. He said he went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist did say to him, you can get better. And that was such a turning point, because I'm imagining and I'm feeling that at that time, the world is just caving in, and you can't imagine ever having this black cloud removed.
Yes, and that black cloud does stay for a long time. But those words for him to say to me, you will get better, you will get through this, did give me some hope. And I continued. I went to CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which in hindsight was an amazing thing. And I carried on with my life, and I was on antidepressants, and I still am to this day. Came off them for a little bit, and then I had a bit of a blip back in 2015, 16, something like that. My daughter started university, and for some reason my anxieties got on top of me, and I ended up going back on the antidepressants, which I am still on, as I just said.
Well, I mentioned, and as someone who is going into talking therapy, what's important, I think, also to know is that it's so important to talk and to express yourself, but sometimes there is a chemical imbalance, and sometimes it's so important to actually get some medication. And that is a real stigma also that one has to go through, because you saw amazing results once you were on medication, didn't you?
I did, and it's very interesting that you say that, because the psychiatrist at that time did describe that to me. He said it is a chemical imbalance in your brain, and the tablets just make the switch onto the right switch, and it begins to help. Now, it doesn't help everyone, and it can take a while. I was lucky, thank God, that when I started taking them, it was quite a quick, I felt better quickly. But it's not like that for anyone. It can take a long, long time.
Can I ask you, when you had that recurrence, did you feel that because you had the experience, you'd been to the psychiatrist, you'd had the medication, you'd had the talking therapies, you were able to nip it in the bud, so to speak, and be able to be helped quicker than you had the original time? It was a quicker recovery?
Yes, absolutely. I found, as you rightly described, when you have depression, I don't know if it's like for everyone. As I said, I only can tell you about my own experiences. It's like it is a dark cloud, a black cloud descending over you, and for whatever reason you can't seem to get yourself out of it. And I felt that black cloud coming, and I knew it was that time that I needed to go back to the doctors. Everything had been fine previously, but it was coming, and I thought as you said, nip it in the bud quickly. I went back to the doctors, broke down in the doctor's office, didn't expect to do that, and she quickly administered me some more antidepressants, which was great. So I
ask you, Cheryl, as someone who went through so many years without diagnosis, being told that you just had to pull yourself together, snap out of it, how did you actually feel when you were diagnosed?
I felt, as I said, I felt some relief. I did wonder how I was going to get out of that hole, but when he said those words to me, "You will get better," it was some relief, but it wasn't an instant relief, because I knew that there was a long road ahead of me, and there were some days which I thought to myself, I'm never going to get out of this. This is my life. I'm never going to find my way out. Thank God I did, and I still continue to struggle. Some days I have bad days, some days I have good days. It just depends. But I like to talk about my experiences, and if I can help anyone by talking, and I'm very open about it.
It's very helpful to so many people. I mean, to me, what sounded very painful was when you described how you had the breakdown in front of your husband and your children. And I'm also wondering how one can help our children and our families stay emotionally stable when going through such a crisis. What would you say to people to be able to help family, to help children? What could be helpful?
I think the message that I would tell people, and as I said, it's all my lived-in experiences. For me, I parent my children differently from how my parents parented me. So my parents were very they didn't like to talk about things. They were very quiet, and sort of, it was not something, we weren't a very open family with my parents. But with my kids, I decided that I wouldn't sugarcoat anything. So they experienced it, yes, I think my daughter was about 10 at the time, or 11, and my son was 8. I told them how it is. This is what happens to people sometimes, and I think from what they experienced and what they know about mental health now, it's over the years growing up, it's helped them with maybe some of their anxieties. And I know that my daughter suffered with anxiousness when she was at secondary school, when she made that leap from primary to secondary and secondary to uni. It was hard, and people underestimate that. It is a very difficult time for teenagers. But as I said, I don't sugarcoat things. I tell them how it is, and that's me. I tell it how it is.
Well, it sounds to me as if you normalized it, which I think for anyone who's watching who might be experiencing emotional difficulties and illness and have children are feeling this guilt, because at the end of the day, as you said about your parents, this feeling of shame and guilt, which now, thank God, is not happening anymore. But I think the more we talk about it, the more we explain it to our children, the more we try to help our children to understand that it's actually okay to not be okay.
Exactly.
That's really wonderful.
Yes, thank you. If they say if you've got a broken leg or a broken arm, you can see that, but you can't see what's inside. Don't be afraid to talk about it. There's no stigma attached to it anymore. Talk about it, bring it out in the open. It'll help you. It'll really help.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You've really shared so much and you've taught us so much. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'd now like to call upon Esther Marshall, who is an ex-Suburb girl and very beloved to the community, as are her parents. It's exceptionally emotional, and we're very grateful to you to come now at such a time when we know that it was Rebecca's Yahrzeit last week and the English anniversary this week. And we're very grateful that you're here to talk to us. And as a lived experience, I wanted to know whether you would share with us the impact Rebecca's illness had on you growing up, please.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca was, for anyone watching this that knew her, the most phenomenal mind. Her brain stretched way further than anyone I've ever known. So intelligent. I remember her talking to me about medical anthropology and reciting whole doctorates almost. And even when we were younger, the stuff she'd tell me, it just completely go over my head. And as an older sister, I thought, oh, I don't know anywhere near as much as my younger sister. If anything, she was the oldest. She was, I used to stand behind her. I remember when we used to come into Kiddish, but, she was so bright and beautiful. And just as her life went on, I think she suffered from anxiety, depression, and then she went through multiple different diagnoses. And watching that and watching your sister go through that, it was horrible. It was harrowing. And all you want to do is take away that pain. You want to help in some way. And as Cheryl was saying, the medication for some people takes, a short amount of time to work. With Rebecca, it took a long time, and we had to go through multiple different ones. And were they working, and was it the right diagnosis, and did they change the diagnosis? And to constantly be told, something's wrong, but we don't necessarily know what it is.
Esther, I'd say it was just all so complicated. It's, I would just call it complicated. It's not a simple arithmetic. It's about sometimes getting that right balance, but sometimes it's too complicated.
It was exceptionally complicated, and a incredible learning curve for all of us in understanding the medication, the dose of the medication, how often, when, how they all reacted, how the chemicals could react together, and what signs and symptoms could happen to her as a result of that. Some of which were so traumatic for her that, actually at points I don't want to be on the medication. This is really hurting me. And how do you pull that when you watch someone in so much pain, and that this medication may help, but that it's actually causing them pain as well? It was so complex. So yeah, that's the only word I can use with it. So complex, so painful. And she just desperately didn't want to be there. You could see it in some of her kind of more lucid moments. She said, I want this pain to go away. I don't understand it. And other times when she wasn't so lucid, watching her in this deep and utter pain internally, where she was just there, just talking, and there was absolutely nothing you could do. You could stay with her for hours, and there was nothing you could do. She felt helpless. We felt helpless. To me, mental illness is just as important as physical illness. Watching anyone suffer from that kind of thing, and watching the deep, deep suffering, you can't make it up. The stigma of, oh, I'm just depressed, I'm this, I'm that. There is absolutely no way this could be made up, or this could be flung on as I think I've got a little bit of mental illness.
I mentioned earlier about how, thank God, we have progressed, and how the stigma and taboo, the education that we have is so much more than we used to have. And that, as you were just saying now, mental illness is really regarded the same as physical illness. So when you describe Rebecca's illness, I would say it sounds like a cancer of the brain. There's nothing different to that. when someone's ill with cancer, there is a lot of empathy, there is a lot of emotional feelings, there is a lot of understanding. And whereas till now, it's been something that people have sort of kept away from, now we are understanding that this is an illness just like any other illness, as a physical illness. And that's why it's so painful, because you describe Rebecca as such a bright, beautiful, wonderful girl who had so much to live for and so much she wanted to live for, and she had such an understanding. And yet she was so very ill. But you did say to me that there has been some breakthrough which did give you some comfort. There has been a shift which you saw yourself after her passing.
Yeah, I remember when you came to the house, and I remember, I mean, for anyone that's been through any grief, whether it's from a physical illness or a mental illness, and someone you love has passed away, the cloud that comes over, but the amount that you have to do so quickly. I didn't know whether I was coming or going, and you came into the house, and I was so worried that she wasn't going to be honored with the right burial. And that for me was, I was getting very angry about it. You know, there's a lot of emotion anyway. And you said to me, no, she will have the same burial as any other person who has died from anything else. And that calmed me down. I do believe that we still have a long way to go. I do a lot of external panels, I guess, outside of the Jewish community and some within the Jewish community. I think everyone still has a way to go. I think we need more leaders to come out and talk about it more openly, like this, but just so that people know that it happens to anybody, a bit like, unfortunately, cancer can happen to anybody.
Definitely, and of course we have a long way to go, but I wanted to know that just like you had a lot of comfort from it, I had a lot of comfort, and I felt good to be able to share with you that actually Orthodox Judaism understands that mental illness and someone taking one's life because they are so emotionally and mentally ill is treated as if it was a physical illness, and therefore the utmost respect must be given. And so I think that is a way that we are going forward, thankfully. And hopefully,
I think one of the ways, in a way, as well, of, you know, someone dies from mental illness, we don't say someone died from physical illness. You mentioned the illness, right? Rebecca died from a diagnosis of bipolar. She didn't die because of mental illness. And for me, that's where we need to get to, because people just bracket everything together, and it is complex, and then there is lots, but there is the same.
Sometimes there isn't a diagnosis, actually. I think sometimes, you know, there is an umbrella name which doesn't sound as personal as something like bipolar, but I think it's because very often it's something which remains unknown, and that's why it's just given an umbrella name. But I'm happy that things are going forward and that you are pioneering to advance further. And the more education we have and the more we're able to be aware of ourselves and of other people, the more hopefully we will be able to help others. On a positive note, you've chosen to give up a really senior corporate job to do something really idealistic and to work with children. And I know this is in memory of Rebecca, and her name and her life will always stay alive in that way. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, I remember multiple times whilst Rebecca was in hospital, when you go through this state, you get very deep and you think a lot. We would have hours and hours of conversations. And there was one day where she said to me, Esther, why were we chosen to have such privilege? Me and Rebecca always bonded over, you know, we grew up in the suburb. We had the most wonderful opportunities given to us, but we also weren't, you know, because my parents are NHS doctors, we used to see life outside of the suburb. And a lot of the times we couldn't compute the two. How come we've been given this privilege and others don't? And Rebecca said to me, I know why, because we're going to use our privilege to make a difference. And after she passed away, going back to my job and sitting there and thinking, having those words constantly with me, I was like, oh, I am making a difference in my job. It's okay. It's okay. And more it just niggled and niggled and niggled at me. And to a point where I was like, I want to keep Rebecca's legacy alive. I know how much she wanted to talk about mental health and the positive aspect of mental health with the next generation, of how can we talk about it to the next generation about just as much as physical health. How can we give them a positive light of mental health and educate them in that? And so I've written a book, a children's book, written a few, and actually the idea of it came about the series came about from Rebecca when I first had my son, and she said, "Why don't you write and I'll do the illustrations?" Because she was a phenomenal artist. Unfortunately, she then went into hospital and wasn't able to do so. But the whole idea came together, the two of us, when I came out of a night feed and I was exhausted, and she was there to help pull me through. So the second book that I've written is Sophie Says It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And I'm leaving my lovely, very cushy corporate job to go to something not so cushy, but that will make such a positive social impact, speaking to children about mental health and the positives of mental health and how they can look after their mental health. And it's just trying to bring Rebecca with me every day, because that's all I want. She's not here. So how can I have her with me? You know?
Well, that sounds very, very therapeutic and very brave. And yes, Rebecca will live on with all these beautiful books and the education you're going to be sharing. And hopefully you will be able to help others through her books and through her legacy. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. Thank you. I'm now going to call upon Ben Winton. Ben is someone actually who knows Esther. And I was actually very excited when I heard that Ben was going to be one of the panelists, because when I heard his name, I said, "Hey, Ben, he's my neighbor." So Ben is my ultimate boy next door. He was brought up next to me 2 doors away from us till about 6 months ago. And we always used to stop and chat by the car, etc. And always the most charming, lovely boy. And I was totally unaware what was going on behind the scenes, totally unaware. And then slowly I was made more aware. And it was a real privilege for me to be able to also see him getting better and seeing him getting engaged and now married to the lovely Renata, and having them over at our Shabbat table. And therefore, I am very honored to be able to speak to Ben tonight, who is actually working for Jamie and is helping many other people. And I would love you to be able to share a little bit about your journey with us, please, Ben.
Hi, Rochelle. Thank you so much. A wonderful introduction. And yes, it's funny being on here, but I'm very glad that we're both on this. And just to say before I start on my own journey that to Esther, that I knew Rebecca, my wife, and the Fromson family who I married into knew her very intimately. And there's this phrase where we say that someone's memory should be a blessing, and that the work you do makes the memories of Rebecca's life even more of a blessing. So thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay, a bit about my journey. Before I was 19, my story was pretty normal and, broadly speaking, one of a happy, average Northwest London Jew. Towards the end of my gap year in yeshiva and the beginning of university, so this was about 2011, I started bursting into tears and not knowing why. I started sleeping for about 14 hours a day, and I was completely clueless at this point. And so in my family, we thought that I had some physical illness that would blow over. I also attributed some of the sadness to being in the wrong degree, and went to switch degrees. But when I returned the following year to start my philosophy degree, something was still seriously wrong. I was exhausted a lot of the time. I was uncharacteristically anxious. I found it difficult to make basic decisions. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't eat. And I started having these fleeting mental images of ending my own life. And I noticed being bombarded with negative thoughts of being a failure, of not being worthy, of not being good enough, that I really didn't have growing up. It didn't make sense to me. I also, and this was the symptom that actually got me to a doctor, I physically slowed down. I think that with depression, which I ended up being diagnosed with later, you actually end up moving significantly slower. So I felt like I was walking in a swimming pool whenever I was walking. And it was this slowing down that actually persuaded me to go see a doctor, who misdiagnosed me with a light depression and gave me a very small amount of medication and recommended a couple of free sessions of university counselling, and thought I would be fine. But within 6 months, I was much worse. I became catatonic. I couldn't move, I couldn't feel anything, and I became increasingly close to taking my own life. But in a moment of clarity, I actually asked my parents to be hospitalized because I was getting very close to completing suicide. And while an inpatient, I regretted my moment of clarity and made a very serious suicide attempt. However, just as I was losing consciousness, I saw mental images of my family and my close friends. And there's obviously a lot more to say here, but I had a moment of struggling out and saving my life. And I realized that I needed, for the sake of the people that I loved, I needed to give myself a good shot at trying to get better. And I gave myself 10 years to try and turn this around. And I've since dropped that deadline of 10 years, but it was very motivating for me at the time. And I did all the group therapy, the one-to-one therapy, the thought diaries, the difficult work to reorder my core beliefs about not being good enough. I took astonishing doses of antidepressants and tried to be as accepting as possible of the side effects that they had. They caused changes in my mind, my body, my memory. I did all of this in light of that moment I hit rock bottom, when a spark had reignited inside of me. And with that, and with my incredible support system of family and friends and a therapist, I managed to return to university, and I graduated. I did well, and I thought that was it. But periods of normality never became permanent. I kept having relapses. And at some point, I realized that my old life wasn't coming back and that I'd have to adjust to a new normal. Yeah.
And is that when you decided to change your career choice?
Yeah, so I had to do some serious reflections on what my new normal would look like if this was going to be chronic and to stay with me. And one of those was to change my choice of what I was going to do with my life. I planned on doing something in academia or policy, but there's this phrase that when life throws you lemons, make lemonade, and my lemons were particularly brutal, but I wanted to turn my mental health experiences into an opportunity, not just serving as obstacles to something irrelevant that I wanted to do. So I decided to move into mental health and become a peer support worker. So I've now been working at Jamie for over a year. It's the best job I've ever had.
That must be incredibly rewarding. Incredibly rewarding.
It's the best job I've ever had. It was again, there were some silver linings to the story, and one of them is that I probably have a much better, more fulfilling day-to-day life doing this than I would have as a bureaucrat or as an academic under publish or perish expectation.
That was an outstanding point that you wanted to make, actually, when you shared with me your story and the struggles you went through and the struggles you still go through. And you said to me you wanted to talk about the silver linings. I was blown away by that. I thought that was fantastic. So would you like to share a little bit about the silver linings in your life?
Sure. I think I gave away at least one of them, which is about appreciating what's important. I was never particularly materialistic, but I probably was overly intellectually concerned. And I've just realized that while obviously that's still one of my preferences and values to read nonfiction and to look into ideas, it's just not the measure of a person to what degree they invest in that. And my experience has led me to go back to basics and appreciating the basic humanity in people, which I've had to do, but I think it's shown me some things that are more important. Maybe another way is that I met my wife, Renata. Now,
I'm going to say that Renata is a doctor, qualified doctor, had the support of Ben to be able to finish her studies, and they're the most wonderful couple. But I think also what struck me when you were giving your phrase, you chose your phrase as your Judaism, that actually it was your Judaism that helped you. And I'm really intrigued, and I'd like you to share with everyone how it was that your Judaism helped you on this journey.
sure. So I'll give various caveats at the end, because I don't think that religion is a fix-all in any way, but it still has given me something, which is I think that also my situation has got me to reflect on some of the norms in our society, particularly our secular society, where lots of things are about pleasure and pain. And it doesn't make much sense for someone like me to be alive if it's just about measures of pleasure and pain. I unfortunately experience much greater levels of pain, at least ones that are significant enough to not justify the pleasure. And Judaism has given me another system and way to look at the world that doesn't value life based on pleasure and pain. And of course, they're important, but they're not everything. And I read from, I mean, there are many sources, but off the top of my head, Devarim tells us to choose life. And in my situation, it really feels like a choice, and I try to embody that. Now, I have to clarify in all kinds of ways and say that it's based on your context and your upbringing whether anything like this is going to be of any comfort to you, and it doesn't give any faithful people a reason to judge those who end their lives for all kinds of reasons. But it's done this one thing for me, and alongside many other things, it keeps me going for now. But yeah, I think that would...
That's really impressive. I mean, I think you said to me that you actually give a Torah class once a week. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I give a class on Fridays at Jamie, a pre-Shabbat class, where we often look at the week's parasha Torah portion. And I do think that there are lots of messages in there that speak to our situation. One just off the top of my head is of Noah being righteous in his generation, and just the idea of righteousness being relative to where you are is important and helps us with perfectionism. We can be good enough. We don't have to be perfect across time, and that our standards can be lowered in light of that. So I try to find messages that are relevant and use the Jewish tradition as a source of hope and reassurance for people.
It's wonderful. I mean, what's shouting at me as I'm talking to all three of you now is that all three of you have taken your struggles and found a way to be able to help others and to be able to give to society, which I think is amazing. You know, Cheryl, by sharing, by being so open and, you know, really wanting to educate as many people as possible. Esther, by giving up her career and doing this idealistic book to keep Rebecca's memory alive and to help children understand about mental well-being. And you know, being a peer for Jamie and being an ambassador for Jamie and helping so many youngsters, and also sharing the ideas of the Torah and hopefully filling that tank of spirituality that will possibly help when people are struggling. As we know, it's not a blanket rule, but we know that there are certain elements which one can do to try and help. And I think that it's really, really commendable, really commendable. Thank you so much. Thank you. And continue your wonderful work and continue making me and everyone who knows you so proud. And I just wanted to bring together now the three panelists together, Cheryl and Esther. And I don't know if you did hear what I said, but literally at the top of my head, I was thinking as I was talking to Ben, how amazing that all three of you have used your struggles to find something positive and a way to be able to do something positive. And for you, of course, Esther, you know, it will be such an honor for Rebecca's memory and for your whole family. And Ben, for you, you know, to have gone against the grain and to now be helping others in your situation. And Cheryl, educating and talking to youngsters and just normalizing that other mothers and other people in your situation will be brave enough to talk. So thank you so, so much for joining us and for being so honest and so genuine. And as we started off by each of you giving a quote, I was wondering whether each of you can think of a sentence you'd like to end our session with, an idea that anyone listening can take from Mental Health Awareness Weekend and something that they can keep in mind. Cheryl,
Yeah.
you do?
Oh, yes.
As the bubbly, chatty one.
Sorry?
As the bubbly, chatty one, if you don't mind me asking.
I don't know if you describe that, but they certainly think that I've got a big mouth. But anyway, I would say be open and be honest and talk to whoever you can, if you can, to normalise this important topic, normalise their mental health and make everyone aware that it's nothing to be frightened of. There's no taboo. And as my mother, may she rest in peace, always used to say, it's good to talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Esther, what would be your sentence that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure, I think mine's simple as what I've been doing, but yeah, it's okay not to be okay.
I'm very intrigued. I'm definitely getting the book. Okay, and I think it's very similar to what Ben said about it's okay not to be perfect, to be good enough. To be good enough is just fine. Thank you. And Ben, what would be your words of wisdom?
Coming on from exactly what you said, Rochelle, I'll give a sentence and then a short explanation of it. I think it's helped make unconditional love and care more normal in society. I think societies that don't remind its members that they're worthy in virtue of being human end up forgetting the message. And there's always going to be a place for high standards of competency and aspire high, but those aims are preferences, not preconditions of our love.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what I'm going to say off the cuff. No one should suffer in silence. Don't suffer in silence. If you're struggling, if you're not feeling right, talk about it, get some help. And if you see someone who you feel isn't quite right, approach them and try and guide them in the right way. And that's why we're so privileged that we are living in a time when all these things are open to us and we're being educated. And now at Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue, actually, we're being trained to do mental health first aid. And there's room, I think, Cheryl, you've done it, haven't you, actually? Cheryl's done it. It's a wonderful course. It's a wonderful course. And there is room if anyone else wants to join for the next time, for the next sessions. We're also doing the Hope Workshop. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. To understand hope and to help people in dark times. And we're constantly on a mission to educate and to improve the ability to understand what other people are going through. And so I'm saying thank you to you because you are the best ambassadors and you are the people that we learn the most from. But I would also like to end off by saying a very special thank you to Jenny Sears, because I know she was very instrumental in getting our speakers, Zoe Sinclair, Catherine Isaacs, and to say that we hope we'll meet each other soon and spend good, happy times together. And we won't forget the lessons you've taught us, and we will continue to live our lives as you've advised us. Thank you so much and have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.